So welcome everyone to another video. The purpose of today's video is to share 3 upcoming ASHP webinars that's going to be released in the next few weeks. And not only that, we also have Scott with us today, special guest, who is the presenter of two of these webinars, and he's actually going to talk more about the webinars themselves. Before we dive into the webinars, let's get to know Scott a little bit more. So Scott, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, like your background and education?
Sure thing, I'd love to. And thank you very much for having me on your channel. This is really exciting to be with you on this, Brian. And so my name is Scott Nelson. I'm a pharmacist and informaticist, and I am currently an assistant professor in biomedical informatics and a program director for a master's in applied clinical informatics program. So I do a lot of work kind of in operations with medication safety informatics and also in education in the informatics space. A little bit about my background. So for my education, I pretty much got all my degrees at the University of Utah. So a bachelor's in medical biology and then my PharmD. And then after pharmacy school, I kind of took a different route and did a 2-year fellowship in medical informatics at the VA in Salt Lake City, and also a master's in medical informatics at the University of Utah. So it's
Wow.
been a great adventure. And the thing is, like in pharmacy school, I would have never have imagined this pathway, but just the way things fall into place. And looking back, it's like, yeah, this is exactly where I wanted to be the whole time. I just didn't really know that it existed. And I just feel so thankful and excited to have found it.
And I can certainly echo the quality of training we get. We both actually studied at the University of Utah. I don't need my residency there, but University of Utah is a fantastic organization. Very interesting background, by the way, Scott. I don't think I see a lot of individuals that went through that pathway. So I think a lot of folks would be interested in that.
Yeah, I feel like it's pretty unique.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, now let's talk a little bit about the webinars. Can you talk very briefly about each one of them and tell us like maybe what they're about?
Sure, yeah. So we have 3 webinars coming up with ASHP from the SOPIT, or the section of Pharmacy Informatics and Technology group at ASHP. The first webinar is on medication data standards and operational applications. And that's going to be a free CE and also available on demand. So like it'll be posted there for the next, who knows, however many years. And then we are going to record that and release it on April 27th of this year. So that is coming up really soon. And what's cool about it is it really takes a detailed look into different medication terminologies with a deep dive into the free resource from the National Library of Medicine called RxNorm. And it looks at things like how medication data is represented in the technology, what are some of the pros and cons to the different terminologies or groupings of medications into different classes and things. So it's really a medication-centric look at how do we communicate medication data in our systems.
Okay.
The next one is interoperability, fundamentals, standards, and terminologies. And this one is, again, a free CE coming out on May 5th. And this one really kind of looks at how do systems and applications communicate with each other? And what are the 3 main levels of interoperability, such as foundational, structural, and semantic interoperability? We also discuss why health standards are important and why the terminologies are also important for sharing that meaning, as well as some descriptions and links and resources for different standards available, such as, again, RxNorm, SNOMED, ATC, other things like that. And then the third one is it's going to be coming out sometime in May or June. And it is strategies to turn pharmacist documentation into actionable data, real life examples and outcomes. And this one is really focusing on the past, present, and future of pharmacy documentation in the electronic health record and how we can take that data and make it into actionable outcomes of things we can actually do something with. So I'm really excited for all three of these. I think it'll be a great opportunity to dive into something that's new, that's different for a lot of people that they maybe haven't put a lot of thought into. And this is a great idea to get exposure to those kinds of things that we really take for granted, I think, a lot of times. It's like we can communicate and talk back and forth, right? But when we actually try to think about, well, what is the syntax or the grammar of how we speak, and that we have shared semantic meaning of the English language and things like that, and really kind of understanding more about communication and how we're able to do that with technology. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, you know what? On that note, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on how you would explain something like this to, let's say, perhaps a brand new student who is not familiar with anything in informatics. And these are topics that I'm super passionate about. And when I go out to the field, work with other clinicians, or let's say clinician students, I'm always trying to explain to them the importance of this type of work. So I'm very curious to hear you. How would you summarize actually to like this type of these topics to someone who is, let's just say a student, for example? What exactly is interoperability? Like what does that mean? Like what they don't know what syntax is, they don't know what the RX norm, all these type of terminology. Like how would you explain that as simple as you can to someone that's a student?
Yeah, so the webinars are actually designed towards somebody that has no exposure to any of this. And so we have lots of great examples of the different layers of interoperability, and as well as a description of it. I would say interoperability is really the ability to send and receive and understand messages. So to have like one hospital be able to send data to another hospital, and then for them to receive that data and actually understand what it means, is interoperability. A lot of times people will think of like health information exchanges. And in the past, that's really been more of a noun. Like a health information exchange is like the central database. Everybody sends their stuff to it, and now they can pull stuff out of it. Health information exchange now is more of a verb of how do we share that data in between systems and not necessarily needing a central repository, and how can we kind of distribute that out to different locations. And as long as we're using a standard structure to the messages and shared meaning in what we actually put in those messages, then we can understand each other as we communicate from system to system.
You know, there's probably a lot I can learn from you, Scott. I think we're gonna have you back on. But I love these topics. It's obvious that you're very passionate about them and knowledgeable on them as well. So we're probably gonna have you back. But okay, so fantastic resources. You have these 3 webinars. And I'm sure there are many other informatics type resources that you're familiar with as well. And I'm sure the audience will be too. Can you share some of the resources that you would recommend to individuals that are interested in pharmacy informatics?
Yeah, so as far as like some online resources, if you were to go to Google and just search for RxNav, NAV, so RxNav, like the top result will be for RxNav, which is a graphical way of looking at Rx norm. And it's cool because then you can crosswalk between like brands and generics and ingredients and dispensables and NDC codes and all over the place, which is pretty neat. Another one is RX class, which then has like a class-centric view of medications. So how are medications grouped in different terminologies? So sometimes I'll hear people will be like, oh, I need a list of all beta blockers. And it's like, okay, well, let me go look. And there's different ways of saying that, but at least there's a resource that I can go to help come up with a list. And then of course, use our clinical knowledge and information on how drugs work to say, for this project, they're looking for systemic beta blockers. So we're going to remove the ophthalmic drops and these other kinds of things. So it's a great opportunity to use the clinical knowledge we have and also some of the free resources. As far as other student resources, there's some great information on the ASHP website. There's a link for student resources that has like some videos about pharmacy informatics. There's a lot of information available in the literature, different papers and things related to this. There's some great papers that I like from, I think it's Charles Friedman, on what informatics is and isn't, and also the fundamental theorem of informatics. Those are some great papers that I like. And then as far as other resources, I mean, there's great resources with ASHP and the SOPIT group, also with AMIA, the American Medical Informatics Association, and resources that they have. There's just a lot out there. So I'm happy to help even provide additional resources to help answer specific questions people have too.
Yeah, yeah. You know what we'll do is we'll take all the resources that you mentioned there, and then we'll put it in the description of the video below, because that's a very common question that individuals ask, like, how can I learn more about informatics? So all fantastic. I don't think I was familiar with you said Freemouth, papers from Freemouth?
Yeah.
I don't think I was familiar with that.
It's really good. The fundamental theorem of informatics is this concept of the computer plus the person is better than the computer or person alone. It's kind of like this synergistic thing. And so we're not trying to replace people with computers because the computer can't do as well by itself, but really how do we take technology and empower our clinicians, our pharmacists and others to be able to operate at the top of their license and to be able to do the best they can and help improve our patient outcomes.
I completely agree with that. And you know what? I'm probably going to read that paper tonight. You sold me on it. Okay. Yeah. So let's move on to another question on these. You know, like, again, it's obvious that you're very passionate about these topics and you're very knowledgeable about it. But, you know, one of the things that I always think about in terms of these topics is, why is it important? You know, especially to individuals who are not really involved in this work, or to, let's say, a lot of the audience are usually students who don't know what informatics is. They're thinking about all these other pathways, informatics being one of them. So why is these webinars important? And I take it that you chose these webinars for a reason, these topics. Can you tell us a little bit more? Why do you think they're important?
Yeah, so we've heard a lot of feedback from people saying that they want more information about these topics. So, I mean, it's kind of user demand that this is what they would like to learn more about. But it reminds me of in the early 19th century, there were the railroads were starting to explode, to like grow, and transportation across the country and stuff. And so there was this great expansion of railroads in the United States. But before the Civil War, there were like 20 different track widths. So like you could only have a certain train on a certain size of track. And then if the track changed widths, you had to have a totally different train. And so that really limited the ability to like travel long distances, because people would have to get off of one train and then onto another train to continue going. And with 20 different rail widths, like it really impeded the progress that could be made in transportation in the early 19th century. So then after the Civil War, they adopted a standard track width. So 4 feet, 8 and 1.5 inches was the standard. So with this 4 feet, 8 and 1.5 inches, everybody moved to this for their rail widths. And that allowed the rail system to expand immensely, paving the way really for the transcontinental railway and helping standardize the ability to make trains that will operate on any track, and being able to cross state lines and stuff a lot easier. And it's through this kind of standardization of like the structure of messages that we send and the shared meaning of the words that we're sending that really facilitates kind of this ability to then grow immensely, because now we're all speaking the same language. Now we're not needing a different train for every single different track, which is just prohibitive of expansion. So I think it's something that's really important to me, because it's really like, how do we learn to speak the language to work with other systems? And it's just, it's really cool example of through standardization, we're able to actually grow so much more. And some people think of like standardization as like limiting or constricting, but really it's enabling and freeing, because now that we can have this standard of 4 feet, 8.5 inches, then the sky's the limit of all the other things that we can do now. So that's just one of the reasons why I'm excited about this work. It's something not a lot of people know a lot about and that we don't think about. It's like we just speak English and we understand each other and we take it totally for granted. But the structure and the words we use and actually sharing meaning and connecting and communicating is really important and powerful.
I love the analogy. I really like the analogy. Did not know that about trains. Very fascinating history. I think that's really cool. With that said, I am also curious. Why are you interested in like as brief as you can, why are you interested in informatics? Like what is the motivating factor there? Just hearing you talk about the train history, it seems as though there's something deeper in there, and I'm very curious. What is it that sparked it for you?
So I would say all growing up, I've always had like this interest in technology, but not anything really formal. Like I never learned how to code or all that other stuff. And in pharmacy school, in my rotations, and when I was working at the hospital as an intern, I kept finding opportunities for like, how can we improve the system? Like, I can do the best that I can as a pharmacist or a clinician and provide excellent care for this patient and for that patient, but it's just like this handful of cases. But what are some things that I can do to actually improve the system that we operate in? How can we improve outcomes, not just for a handful of patients, but for like thousands of patients? And I came to realize that like my skill set was more on the level of systems thinking, and that I could really apply that in a powerful way through informatics. And then that way kind of help in assisting our clinicians do the best they can and improve patient outcomes. And yeah, so I have a lot of interest in like medication safety, clinical decision support. A lot of that has an underlying understanding of like, what are the standards and what kinds of things that we can do to improve consistency. So that way we're even limiting cognitive overload just to operate in the system that we're asked to operate in. So I think that's a real passion of mine, has become systems thinking, quality improvement, and how we can improve things, not just for pharmacy, but a lot of the work that I do is with nursing and with physicians. And that was another thing that I really enjoyed on my rotations in pharmacy school, was all the interactions with the rest of the healthcare team. And informatics really gives me an opportunity to collaborate with them very closely and improve the system that we work in.
Okay. Oh, thanks for sharing that. That I think that's part of why I've been so interested in doing these types of videos and things, because I wish I knew about it earlier. You talked about learning about it on rotations, but as a student, I wish I learned about it as a P1 or a P2, something like that. But then again, a lot of the students nowadays are starting to pick up on it because we see more and more informatics resources. So I'm so glad that we're doing things like this, and for you coming on.
Yeah, and I mean, even the definition of what is informatics, I think, is still not well understood across the country.
100%.
Everybody has their own definitions for it. And I mean, one way that I see it is that how do we leverage technology to improve healthcare for our patients? And how do we enable our clinicians to improve healthcare for our patients? There's a lot of people that think that informatics is drug information. I remember applying for jobs and they're like, yeah, we could use somebody that can write some drug monographs for us. And I'm like, I don't think you understand what informatics is. Even in pharmacy school, I always thought that informatics was, this is a motherboard and this is how you network between dispensing cabinets. And it's not, it's so much more than that. And so, yeah, it's an exciting field and something I'm very passionate about.
Yeah, we're definitely going to bring you back on, Scott. We're definitely going to bring you. There's just so much that we can, you have a lot of knowledge that I would like to tap into a little bit more. But how about for the audience out there, on a concluding question here, a lot of individuals are usually interested in informatics and learning what it is about. Now, from your experience, are there any tips or advice that you can share with those individuals that are perhaps interested in diving deeper into pharmacy informatics and even perhaps as a career?
Yeah, for sure. Watch the webinars, right?
Okay.
But other than that, there are tons of resources online. There are lots of like master's programs in informatics, and I personally kind of see the field as shifting more towards needing postdoctoral, postgraduate education because it is such a diverse field. It's so wide in scoping, and there's just so many fundamental things that we have to learn even in the books, but not just learning those things in the books, but actually applying them in our work and applying them in what we're doing. So I think that's a really important thing. The other piece of advice I would have is to not limit yourself to the pharmacy world. Informatics is a huge new space. And I think a lot of times in pharmacy, we tend to be more introspective and looking within the pharmacy group. But there are so many lessons of things that we can learn from our nursing colleagues, from physicians, from PAs, and all sorts of other people, even veterinarians. Like there's so many different people in the clinical practice and in the informatics space that we can learn cool things from, and then think of, okay, now how do I apply that to what I'm doing? How can I apply that to pharmacy? How can I apply that to improving my workspace? There's just a lot of really cool stuff out there. Another one that I get a lot of questions about is, what is this about machine learning and artificial intelligence? And just a quick little plug that we published a paper recently in ASHP on demystifying artificial intelligence in pharmacy that provides a good tutorial for what is this artificial intelligence thing we're talking about, and trying to help demystify and explain a lot of that and make it more approachable to thinking about how can we think about that in our clinical settings, and how does this affect me, and how can I be involved in kind of in that process.
Yeah, we can definitely talk for a long time if we kept going. But fantastic. I'll link that resource down as well. I read that paper and it was very great, and I would highly recommend to anyone that's interested in learning more. Okay, well, we'll kind of wrap up the video here. Thank you very much, Scott, for being with us today. And then hope everyone finds value in watching these webinars. So I'm going to release the video today. The next one, the first webinar is coming out next week.
The 27th. Yeah.
Yeah.
So coming up soon.
Yeah. So make sure everyone to sign up for that as soon as possible. And we'll post links below in the description of the video. Well, thanks everyone again, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.